The bullet grazed so close to Sarah McKenna's cheek that she felt the heat of it before she heard the crack of the rifle. And in that moment, as she threw herself behind the overturned wagon, she realized her carefully constructed life in Tombstone, Arizona territory, was about to shatter like glass under a hammer. It was late summer of 1882, and the mining town sprawled across the desert like a promise half-kept, all dust and determination. Sarah had arrived 3 months earlier with nothing but a battered trunk and a letter of introduction to the Methodist Church, hoping to start fresh after her father's death had left her alone in Kansas City. The Reverend's wife had taken one look at her gaunt frame and hungry eyes and hired her on the spot to help cook for the miners who boarded at the church house. Men who paid $1 a week for 2 hot meals a day and a place to sleep that didn't come with fleas. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it started. Sarah pressed her back against the splintered wood of the wagon, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Across the street, she could see the Silver Dollar Saloon with its doors thrown wide, and the crowd that had scattered when the guns started talking was slowly creeping back, curious as cats. "You all right, miss?" The voice came from above her, and Sarah tilted her head back to find a man crouched on the wagon bed, his revolver still drawn but pointed skyward. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, eyes the color of strong coffee, and a face that looked like it had seen its share of hard weather. Most striking was the gentleness in his expression, completely at odds with the weapon in his hand. "I think so," Sarah managed, though her voice shook. "What happened?" Couple of drunks decided to settle an argument over a card game. He holstered his gun and dropped down beside her with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Name's James Cooper. I work security at the Goodenough mine, but I also help the sheriff keep the peace when things get rowdy." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused but warm, and he pulled her to her feet as though she weighed nothing at all. "Sarah McKenna, I cook at the church house." "I know." When she looked at him in surprise, a flush crept up his neck. "I mean, I've seen you at the market. You always buy the vegetables that are a bit past their prime because they're cheaper." Sarah felt her own cheeks heat. It was true. Every penny mattered when you were trying to save enough to perhaps, someday, have something of your own. "Waste not, want not," she said, brushing dust from her skirts. "Sensible." James picked up the basket she had dropped, gathering the scattered potatoes and onions. One had rolled into the street, and he retrieved it, wiping it on his shirt before placing it carefully with the others. "Let me walk you back. The Reverend would have my hide if I let anything happen to his cook." They walked in silence for a bit, Sarah acutely aware of his presence beside her. He was tall, she noticed, but not so tall that she had to crane her neck to look at him. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. "You're not from here," he said after a while. "It wasn't a question. Kansas City. My father was a clerk until he took sick last winter. After he passed, there wasn't much keeping me there." She didn't mention the creditors, or the landlord who had looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl, or the fact that she had left in the middle of the night with barely enough money for the train ticket. Some things were better left in the past. "I'm sorry about your father." James shifted the basket to his other arm. "It's hard losing family. My parents had a ranch in Texas until Comanche raiders burned them out when I was 15. I've been on my own ever since." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact, but Sarah heard the old grief underneath it. "How did you end up here?" "Drifted west, worked cattle drives, spent a few years in the cavalry. Ended up in Tombstone about 2 years ago and decided it was as good a place as any to put down roots." He glanced at her. "What about you? You planning to stay?" Sarah considered the question. She hadn't really thought beyond surviving, beyond making it through each day with enough food in her belly and a roof over her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose it depends on whether Tombstone wants to keep me." They had reached the church house, a low adobe building with a wooden cross mounted above the door. Through the windows, Sarah could see the long tables where the miners would gather in a few hours for supper. She needed to start the stew, needed to get the cornbread mixed and into the oven. "Thank you for walking me back," she said, taking the basket from him. Their fingers brushed, and she felt that strange spark again, like static before a lightning storm. "Anytime, Miss McKenna." James touched the brim of his hat, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Then he was walking away, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust, and Sarah was left standing in the doorway wondering what had just happened. That evening, 18 miners crowded around the tables, their faces ruddy from the sun and their hands scrubbed as clean as they could get them. Sarah and Mrs. Harwell, the Reverend's wife, brought out the stew in huge iron pots, along with the cornbread and a jar of precious butter that Mrs. Harwell had traded eggs for at the mercantile. The men ate like they always did, with focused intensity, barely pausing to breathe between bites. Sarah moved around the table refilling bowls, making sure everyone had enough, checking that the bread basket stayed full. Only when every man had eaten his fill and some had gone back for seconds, did she finally ladle a small portion into her own bowl and take a seat at the far end of the table. This was her routine, her habit, the pattern she had fallen into without even thinking about it. There was always a fear deep in her bones that there wouldn't be enough, that if she took her share first, someone else would go hungry. It was ridiculous, of course. Mrs. Harwell always made sure there was plenty. But the fear remained, a shadow from the lean times after her father's death when she had sometimes gone to bed with nothing but weak tea in her stomach. She had just taken her first bite when the door opened and James Cooper walked in. He looked around the room, nodded to a few of the miners he knew, then his gaze found Sarah. Something shifted in his expression. "Evening, Mrs. Harwell," he said politely. "I heard you sometimes have room for one more at supper if a man doesn't mind paying." "Of course, Mr. Cooper, Mrs. Harwell was already bustling toward the stove. "Sit yourself down. Sarah, fetch him a bowl." But Sarah had already noticed something. Her bowl, which had been modestly filled, was somehow less than what the miners had gotten, and James had noticed too. She could see it in the way his eyes flicked from her portion to the pot, to her face. He sat down across from her, and when Mrs. Harwell brought his bowl, he looked at it for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the stove himself. "Ma'am, if you don't mind, I'm mighty hungry tonight." Worked a double shift. He ladled a generous portion into his bowl, then came back to the table, but instead of sitting down, he stopped beside Sarah. "Miss McKenna, I think you miscounted your portion." Before she could protest, he had spooned half of his stew into her bowl. "There, that's better." "Mr. Cooper, I couldn't possibly." "You've been working all day," he said firmly, finally taking his seat. "Cooking for all these men in this heat, you need to keep your strength up." He picked up his spoon and started eating as casual as you please, as though he hadn't just done something that made Sarah's throat go tight with emotion. The miners were starting to file out, heading to their bunks or back to the saloons. Mrs. Harwell was already clearing plates, humming to herself, and Sarah sat there staring at her bowl, feeling something crack open inside her chest. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. James looked up, his expression serious. "Because you deserve to eat, same as everyone else." "Maybe more since you're the one doing the cooking." He paused. "I saw you waiting until everyone finished, saw you take the smallest portion. How long have you been doing that?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. If she tried to speak, she thought she might cry, and she hadn't cried in front of another person since her father's funeral. "You don't have to go hungry, Sarah." The way he said her name, gentle and careful, made her look up. "Not here, not anymore." She managed a nod, then picked up her spoon with a hand that trembled only slightly. The stew was good, rich with beef and vegetables, and it tasted better than anything she remembered. Or maybe it was just that someone had cared enough to notice. After that night, things began to change in small, subtle ways. James started showing up for supper at the church house 3 or 4 times a week. He always arrived early before the miners, and he took it upon himself to help Sarah carry the heavy pots to the table. And every single time he made sure that Sarah's plate was filled first, properly filled, before anyone else sat down to eat. "You're going to start a riot," she told him one evening, half-joking, as he ladled stew into her bowl with a generous hand. "The miners will think I'm getting special treatment." "You are getting special treatment," James said without a hint of apology. "You're the one who made the food. First share goes to the cook. That's just common sense." "That's not how it works. That's how it should work." He handed her the bowl, then filled his own. "Besides, you've lost weight since you got here, haven't you? I can see it in your face." Sarah wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Her dresses hung looser than they had in Kansas City. She had been so focused on making sure everyone else had enough that she had forgotten to take care of herself. Or maybe she had never learned how in the first place. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself looking forward to those evenings when James would appear at the door. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in the kitchen while Mrs. Harwell tended to other tasks. He would chop vegetables while she stirred pots, and they would talk about everything and nothing. His work at the mine, her plans to maybe start a small baking business on the side, the way the desert looked when the sun set, the books they had both read. "Did you always want to be a cook?" he asked one evening in late September. The heat had finally broken and a cool breeze drifted through the open windows. "Not really." Sarah rolled out dough for biscuits, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I wanted to be a teacher. I was halfway through normal school when my father got sick, and I had to leave to take care of him." She didn't add that all her savings had gone to doctors and medicines that hadn't helped, or that teaching positions required references she no longer had. "Cooking is good, honest work, though." "I don't mind it. You're good at it." James had finished with the carrots and was now peeling potatoes. "Best food I've had in years, and I'm not just saying that. You're kind to say so." Sarah cut the dough into rounds and arranged them on a baking sheet. "What about you?" "Did you always want to work security?" "I wanted to have a ranch like my parents did." There was a wistfulness in his voice. "Raise cattle, good horses, build something that would last." He set down the potato peeler and looked at her. "I've been saving for years now. Got a piece of land staked out about 15 miles north of here, near good water. Haven't built on it yet, but I've got plans." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said, and meant it. She could picture it somehow, a sturdy house with a wide porch, horses in a corral, mountains rising in the distance. "It will be once I get around to it." James picked up another potato. "Just need to save a bit more and then I can start building, maybe by next spring." The conversation stayed with Sarah long after that night ended. She found herself thinking about James's ranch, about what it would be like to have a place of your own, to build something permanent in this wild, untamed land. And she found herself thinking about James himself, about the way he smiled when he was amused, the way his hands moved with quiet competence whatever task he set himself to, the way he always made sure she ate first. It was dangerous, letting herself feel this way. She had nothing to offer a man like James Cooper except herself, and that seemed like a poor bargain. But her heart didn't seem to care about logic. October brought cooler weather and news that set the whole town buzzing. The Earp brothers had left Tombstone for good, heading to Colorado, and there was talk of the Cowboys, the loose gang of rustlers and outlaws who had been terrorizing the territory, making bolder moves now that their main opposition was gone. "You be careful," James told Sarah one evening as he walked her back to her room behind the church. She had started allowing him to escort her after dark, and she had stopped pretending it was just about safety. "Some of those cowboys have been coming into town more often. They're unpredictable, especially when they're drinking." "I'm always careful," Sarah assured him, though his concern warmed her. "Besides, I'm hardly an interesting target. I have nothing worth stealing." James stopped walking and turned to face her. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows, and in its light his face was all planes and angles. "You're worth more than you know, Sarah McKenna." Her breath caught. They were standing close, closer than was strictly proper, and she could see the pulse beating at his throat. James, I know it hasn't been that long, he said, his voice low and rough. I know I should probably wait, should court you proper with flowers and Sunday walks, but I'm not a patient man and life out here is too uncertain to waste time on things that don't matter. He took her hands in his and his grip was warm and solid. You matter to me, Sarah, more than I know how to say, and I think maybe I matter to you too. You do, she whispered. It seemed impossible that this was happening, that this good, kind man was standing in the moonlight telling her he cared for her. You matter so much. Then let me court you, properly the way you deserve. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Let me take you to the church social next week. Let me show this whole town that you're spoken for if you'll have me. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll have you, I'd like nothing more. James smiled, and it was like the sun coming up over the desert. Then he leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away and brushed his lips against hers. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and chaste and full of promise, and when he pulled back, Sarah felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. I'll see you tomorrow, he said softly. Sleep well, Sarah. She watched him walk away, her fingers touching her lips, still feeling the warmth of him. Then she went inside, climbed into her narrow bed and lay awake for hours, replaying every moment, every word, every heartbeat of the evening. The next week passed in a blur of anticipation and nervousness. Sarah found herself humming while she cooked, smiling at nothing, her thoughts constantly drifting to James. Mrs. Harwell noticed, of course, and gave her a knowing look. Mr. Cooper is a good man, she said one afternoon as they kneaded bread together. Steady, hard-working, respectful. The Reverend thinks highly of him. I think highly of him too, Sarah admitted, feeling her cheeks flush. I can see that. Mrs. Harwell patted her arm. You deserve some happiness, dear. You've worked so hard since you came here, never complaining, always putting others first. It's time someone put you first for a change. The church social was held in the social hall on a Saturday evening. Sarah wore her best dress, a blue calico that brought out her eyes, and let her hair down in soft waves instead of pinning it up in her usual practical bun. When James arrived to collect her, the look on his face made all her nervous primping worthwhile. You look beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Thank you. Sarah took his offered arm, feeling like she was walking on air. You look very handsome yourself. He did too. He had traded his usual work clothes for dark trousers and a white shirt, with a string tie at his throat and his hair still damp from washing. He smelled like soap and leather and something else, something essentially him that made her want to lean closer. The social hall was crowded with people from all over Tombstone. There was music from a fiddle and a guitar, long tables laden with food that the women of the congregation had prepared, and an atmosphere of determined festivity. Life in the Arizona Territory was hard, and people took their pleasures where they could find them. James kept Sarah close to his side all evening, introducing her to people she had only seen in passing. The assayer from the mining office, the blacksmith and his wife, the schoolteacher who had just arrived from Philadelphia. Everyone was kind, welcoming, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of belonging. They danced, too, though Sarah protested that she wasn't very good at it. James just laughed and swept her into a reel, and she found herself laughing too, breathless and dizzy and happier than she could remember being. When a slower song started, he pulled her close, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers, and they swayed together while the fiddle sang out something sweet and melancholy. I could get used to this, Sarah said softly, her head resting against his shoulder. Good. James's breath stirred her hair. Because I plan on dancing with you at every social from now until we're too old to stand. That's a long time. I certainly hope so. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip. I'm in this for the long haul, Sarah. I want you to know that. I'm not a man who does things halfway. Neither am I, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The evening ended too soon, as good evenings always do. James walked her home under a sky so thick with stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. They paused at her door, neither quite ready to say good night. "Thank you," Sarah said. "For tonight, for everything. You've made me feel like I matter. You do matter." James cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "You matter to me more than anything in this world, Sarah McKenna, and I aim to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Then he kissed her again, and this time it was deeper, more urgent, full of all the things they hadn't yet said aloud. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah felt like she had been remade into something new and bright. The courtship that followed was swift by conventional standards, but then, nothing about life in the Arizona territory was conventional. James came by every day, sometimes just for a few minutes between shifts, sometimes for hours. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Sarah told him about the shame she had felt when the creditors came, the terror of being alone in the world with no one to rely on. James told her about watching his home burn, about the years of drifting and never quite feeling like he belonged anywhere. "Until I met you," he said one evening in late October. They were sitting on the porch of the church house, watching the sun set over the Dragoon Mountains. "Now I feel like I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Where's that?" Sarah asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Wherever you are." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Sarah, I know it's fast, and I know we haven't known each other that long by some people's reckoning. But I'm 30 years old, and I've seen enough of the world to know what I want. And what I want is you. To marry you, to build that ranch with you, to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." He turned to face her fully. "Will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling so hard it almost hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." James let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, lifting her right off the ground and spinning her around until they were both laughing and dizzy. Then he set her down and kissed her, long and thorough, until Mrs. Harwell cleared her throat from the doorway and they broke apart, sheepish and grinning. "I suppose congratulations are in order," the older woman said, but she was smiling too. "When's the wedding?" James looked at Sarah. "As soon as possible." "As soon as possible," she agreed. They were married 3 weeks later on a crisp November morning with the Reverend officiating and what seemed like half of Tombstone in attendance. Sarah wore a dress that Mrs. Harwell and some of the other church women had made for her, white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that James had ridden out to pick himself. When she walked down the aisle and saw him waiting for her, looking nervous and proud and happier than she had ever seen him, her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. The vows were simple, traditional, but when James said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure, and when Sarah said the same, she meant it with everything she had. The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and James kissed her to the sound of applause and cheering, and Sarah thought she had never known it was possible to feel this complete. The reception was held at the social hall, with food and drink and music that lasted well into the afternoon. People kept coming up to congratulate them, to press small gifts into their hands. A set of dish towels, a cast iron skillet, a Bible with their names inscribed on the first page. It was overwhelming and wonderful, this outpouring of goodwill from a community Sarah had only been part of for a few short months. But the best part was when the crowd finally began to thin and James pulled her aside, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Ready to go see our home, our home." Sarah's heart skipped. "You mean, I've been building," he admitted. "For the past month, every spare moment I had, it's not finished, not by a long shot, but the main house is done enough that we can live in it. I wanted to surprise you." Sarah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Show me." They borrowed a wagon from the livery and drove north out of town, following a rutted track that wound through creosote and mesquite. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, and Sarah leaned against James's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of him. After about an hour, James turned the wagon onto an even fainter trail, and suddenly there it was. A small house built of adobe and timber, with a peaked roof and glass windows and a porch that wrapped around two sides. It sat in a little valley with a creek running through it, cottonwoods providing shade and mountains rising in the distance. It was perfect, James, Sarah breathed. It's beautiful. Come see the inside. He helped her down from the wagon and they walked hand in hand to the front door. He had carved their initials into the lintel, she noticed. JC and SC, intertwined. Then he scooped her up in his arms, making her squeal with surprise, and carried her over the threshold. The interior was simple but solid. One large room that served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace already laid with wood. A table and two chairs that James had clearly made himself. A door leading to a bedroom where a large bed frame stood waiting, and another door to what would eventually be more rooms. I know it's not much yet, James said, setting her down gently. But we can add on as we need to, and I thought you might want to decide how to arrange things, what furniture to get. Sarah turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It's perfect. It's everything I never knew I wanted. You're everything I never knew I wanted, James said, pulling her close. I love you, Sarah Cooper. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you with everything I am. I love you too, Sarah whispered against his chest. I think I have since the day you gave me half your stew. James laughed, a deep, warm sound that rumbled through his chest. Then I'm glad I noticed you were going hungry. Best decision I ever made. That night, they made the house truly theirs. James built up the fire while Sarah unpacked the few belongings they had brought. They ate a simple supper of bread and cheese, sitting close together at the little table, knees touching. And when the stars came out, bright and countless in the vast desert sky, James took Sarah's hand and led her to their bedroom. What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. James was gentle, patient, murmuring reassurances and endearments as they learned each other's bodies, each other's rhythms. And when Sarah finally fell asleep in his arms, completely exhausted and completely happy, she felt safer than she had in her entire life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. James still worked at the mine during the day, but he was saving to buy cattle, to start building the ranch he had always dreamed of. Sarah threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a garden near the creek, learning to cook on the fireplace instead of the big stove at the church house. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done before. The desert was unforgiving, the sun relentless, the isolation sometimes overwhelming. But every evening when James came home, covered in dust and tired to the bone, he would wrap her in his arms and tell her he loved her. And suddenly, the hard work didn't seem so hard after all. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. James taught Sarah to ride, patiently guiding her on an old mare he had bought from a rancher who was leaving the territory. Sarah taught James to read better than the basic skills he had picked up over the years, and they would spend evenings by the fire with a book between them, taking turns reading aloud. And every single meal, without fail, James made sure Sarah's plate was filled first. It became a ritual between them, a reminder of how they had started, of the care he had shown her when she was still learning to believe she deserved it. "You're going to spoil me," she told him one evening as he heaped mashed potatoes onto her plate. "That's the idea," he replied, grinning. "You spent too many years taking care of everyone else. It's my turn to take care of you." "I like taking care of you, though," Sarah protested. "I like cooking for you, looking after the house, all of it. And I like doing things for you." James sat down across from her, his expression turning serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. You're not a burden. You're not taking more than you deserve. You're my wife, my partner, and I want to give you everything I can." Don't ever feel like you have to make yourself smaller or take less so someone else can have more. Not here. Not with me." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Even after months of marriage, his words still had the power to undo her. "I'm trying," she said softly. "It's just hard to break old habits." "I know." James reached across the table and took her hand. "But I'm patient and I'm not going anywhere. We'll work on it together." As winter settled over the territory, bringing cold nights and the occasional frost, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told James on a December evening, nervous and excited in equal measure. They were still getting established, still struggling to save enough to buy the cattle James wanted. Was this the right time? But the look on James's face when she told him erased all her doubts. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time, and when he finally set her down, he knelt before her and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father and I already love you more than I knew was possible." Sarah ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears flowing freely. "We're going to be a family." "We already are a family," James said, looking up at her. "But yes, we're going to be a bigger one, and I promise you, Sarah, I promise our baby, I'm going to take care of both of you. Always." The pregnancy was easier than Sarah had feared. She had some morning sickness in the early months, but James was there to hold her hair back and bring her weak tea and saltines. As her belly grew, he became even more protective, insisting she rest more, take on less of the heavy work. He hired a local boy to help with the chores around the ranch, freeing Sarah to focus on preparing for the baby. In March, James finally had enough saved to buy a small herd of cattle, 20 head that he drove to the ranch with the help of 2 other cowboys. Sarah watched from the porch as they came in, a river of brown and white, and felt a fierce pride in what they were building together. "This is just the start," James said that night, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "By the time this little one is old enough to help out, we'll have a real operation going. Horses, too, if I have my way. Good stock that people will come from all over to buy." "You're going to do it," Sarah said with certainty. "I believe in you." "We're going to do it," James corrected. "This is ours, Sarah. Everything we build together." The baby came in late June of 1883, on a day so hot the air shimmered and wavered like water. Mrs. Harwell came out to the ranch to assist, along with a midwife who had delivered half the babies in Tombstone. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah thought she might not survive it. But James stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. And then, just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the air. Strong, healthy, indignant at being thrust into the world. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Sarah's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Sarah looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and scrunched-up face, and felt a love so overwhelming it was almost painful. "Hello, sweet boy," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." James was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. He touched the baby's head with one finger, reverent and amazed. "He's perfect. Sarah, he's perfect." They named him Thomas James Cooper after Sarah's father and James himself. Little Tommy, as they quickly began calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, and possessed of an appetite that kept Sarah busy nursing him what felt like around the clock. James was a devoted father from the very start. He would wake in the night to change Tommy's diaper, would walk the floor with him when he was fussy, would sing off-key lullabies that somehow always seemed to soothe the baby. And he was just as devoted to Sarah, making sure she rested, making sure she ate well, taking on even more of the ranch work so she could focus on recovering and caring for their son. "You're going to exhaust yourself," Sarah told him one evening when Tommy was about a month old. James had just come in from working with the cattle, and he looked dead on his feet. But he still insisted on holding the baby while Sarah ate her dinner, bouncing Tommy gently and making silly faces at him. "I'm fine," James assured her. This is what I always wanted, Sarah. A family, a home, work that matters. I've never been happier. And looking at him, at the contentment in his eyes and the gentle way he held their son, Sarah believed him. She had never been happier either. The years that followed were full and busy. The ranch grew steadily. James hired on 2 permanent hands to help with the cattle, and he began breeding horses like he had always dreamed of. Sarah started selling baked goods to the mercantile in Tombstone, and the extra income helped them expand even faster. Tommy grew from a baby to a toddler to a rambunctious little boy who followed his father everywhere, chattering constantly and asking a million questions. In 1885, Sarah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma Grace. She had Sarah's blonde hair and James's dark eyes, and she was the apple of her father's eye from the moment she arrived. Tommy was initially skeptical about having a sister, but he quickly became fiercely protective of her, and Sarah often found him sitting beside Emma's cradle, telling her long, rambling stories that made no sense, but that Emma seemed to enjoy anyway. The ranch, which they had named the Copper Creek Ranch after the little stream that ran through the property, was thriving. They now had over 100 head of cattle and a small but growing reputation for quality horses. James had built onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a proper kitchen for Sarah, and he had just started construction on a big barn that would house their horses through the winter. Life was good. Better than good. Sarah sometimes had to pinch herself to believe it was real, that she had gone from scraping by in Tombstone, eating the scraps after everyone else had taken their fill, to this. A home, a family, a husband who loved her beyond measure, children who were healthy and happy. "What are you thinking about?" James asked one evening in September of 1886. They were sitting on the porch after the children had gone to bed, watching the stars come out. It was Sarah's favorite time of day, these quiet moments when they could just be together. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Sarah said, leaning against his shoulder. "How lucky we are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," James said. "Or maybe a little that day I happened to be near that wagon when the shooting started, but the rest of it, Sarah, that was a choice. You chose to trust me, I chose to love you, we chose to build this life together." "Best choice I ever made," Sarah murmured. "Mine too." James pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you, Sarah Cooper, more every day if that's even possible." "It's possible," Sarah said. "I know because I feel the same way about you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the desert night, crickets chirping, a coyote howling somewhere in the distance, the soft lowing of the cattle in their pens. "You ever think about that first night?" Sarah asked. "When you gave me half your stew?" "All the time," James admitted. "It was the moment I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were someone special, someone worth knowing, worth caring about." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together like he had done 1,000 times before. "You were so determined to take care of everyone else, so convinced that you didn't deserve the same care. And I just knew I wanted to be the one to show you different." Sarah smiled, remembering. "You certainly did that. You've spent the last 4 years making sure I eat first, rest enough, have everything I need. And I plan to spend the next 40 years doing the same," James said. "Maybe longer if we're blessed with long lives." "I hope we are," Sarah said softly. "I want to grow old with you, James. I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on this porch when we're 80 and remember all of this. Then that's what we'll do." James stood and pulled her to her feet, then into his arms. "I promise you, Sarah, I'll do everything in my power to give you that life, to give us that life." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of all the love and commitment and partnership they had built over these years. And Sarah kissed him back, her arms around his neck, her heart full to overflowing. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. In 1888, their third child was born, another son they named Daniel. The ranch continued to prosper, and they bought more land, expanding their grazing territory. Tommy started school in Tombstone, riding in with James each morning and back each evening. Emma grew into a bright, curious little girl who loved helping her mother in the garden and collecting wildflowers. Through it all, through the good times and the hard times, through droughts and illnesses and the normal struggles of ranch life, James and Sarah remained each other's constant. They argued sometimes, as any married couple does, but they always made up before bed. They laughed often, worked hard, and never took for granted the life they had built together. And every single meal for all the years they had together, James made sure Sarah's plate was filled first. It became family tradition, something their children grew up with and accepted as normal. Father always served Mother first, made sure she had the best portions, insisted she sit down and eat while the food was hot. "Why do you always give Mama her food first?" Tommy asked one day when he was about 10. They were all sitting down to Sunday dinner, a big roast with all the trimmings. James looked at Sarah, a smile playing at his lips, then back at his son. "Because your mother spent hours making this meal for us. Because she works hard every day taking care of this house and this family. And because I love her, and part of loving someone is making sure they're taken care of." "That's a good reason," Tommy said seriously. And from that day on, he started copying his father, making sure his sister and younger brother were served before he took his own portion. Sarah watched her children growing up strong and kind and thoughtful, and she knew that James had given them more than just a good home. He had given them an example of what love looked like, how partners should treat each other, how to value and care for the people who mattered most. In 1895, when Sarah was 41 and James was 43, their youngest child was born, a daughter they named Rose. She was a surprise, coming more than 6 years after Daniel, but she was welcomed with joy by the whole family. Tommy was 15 by then, already working the ranch alongside his father and growing into a fine young man. Emma was 10, Daniel was 7, and they both doted on their baby sister. "4 children," Sarah said one night, watching James rock little Rose to sleep. "Can you believe it?" "I can believe anything when it comes to us," James said, his voice soft so as not to wake the baby. "We've built something amazing, Sarah. Look at these kids. Look at this ranch. Look at the life we have." Sarah looked around the bedroom, which had been expanded and improved over the years but still felt like home. She looked at her husband, gray starting to show at his temples but still strong and vital, still looking at her with the same love he had shown from the very beginning. And she felt nothing but gratitude. "I was so lost when I came to Tombstone," she said quietly. "I thought my life was over. I thought I would just survive, just get by, and that would be enough. And instead," James prompted, "and instead I found you. And you showed me what it meant to be truly loved, truly valued. You changed everything, James. We changed everything," he corrected, as he always did. Together. The turn of the century found the Cooper family well-established and prosperous. The ranch was one of the most successful in the territory, which had become the state of Arizona in 1912. Tommy had married a local girl and built his own house on a corner of the ranch property. Emma had gone to California for teachers' college and returned to teach in Tombstone. Daniel was talking about becoming a veterinarian, passionate about the horses he had grown up with. And Rose, the baby, was growing into a lovely young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's steady determination. James and Sarah were in their 60s now, slowing down a bit but still active. They had handed over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch to Tommy and the foreman they had hired, but they still helped out where they could. And they still had their evenings on the porch, still had their quiet moments together, still loved each other with a depth and constancy that their children saw and hoped to emulate in their own marriages. "You remember that church social?" Sarah asked one evening in the summer of 1920. They were celebrating their 38th wedding anniversary, and their children and grandchildren had all gathered at the ranch for a big party. The festivities were over now, everyone gone home or to bed, and it was just the two of them under the stars. "I remember every moment of that night," James said. "The way you looked in that blue dress. The way you felt in my arms when we danced. The way my heart nearly stopped when I asked you to let me court you and you said yes." "Best decision I ever made," Sarah said, echoing words she had spoken many times over the years. "Mine too." James took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that was starting to stiffen his joints. "I'd do it all again, Sarah. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. All of it exactly the same as long as it meant I got to spend my life with you." "Me too," Sarah whispered, tears flowing freely down her lined face. "I love you, James Cooper. I always have and I always will." "I love you too," James said, pulling her close. "My Sarah, my wife, my everything." They sat there until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cold. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was richer and fuller than either of them had ever dreamed possible. And if you had asked either of them what the secret was, what had made their marriage so strong and lasting, they would have told you it was simple. They had chosen each other every single day, and they had made sure to show that choice in 1,000 small ways. Like making sure the person you loved ate first before everyone else because they mattered, because they deserved to be cared for, because love wasn't just words or grand gestures but the quiet, steady actions that said, "I see you. I value you. You are worth everything to me." And that, in the end, made all the difference. James passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at the age of 73. Sarah held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart was shattered, she was grateful for every single day they had been given together. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the ranch and the wild early days of Arizona, and most of all, about the cowboy who had noticed she never ate until everyone else finished, and who had made sure her plate was full first. When Sarah died in 1933 at the age of 79, she was buried beside James on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The Copper Creek Ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people could create when they loved each other truly and well. And though the details of their story faded with time, the core of it remained, passed down from parent to child. That love is shown in actions, in the choice to put someone else first, in the daily decision to care for and value the person you have chosen to spend your life with. It was a lesson learned at a dinner table in Tombstone in 1882, when a cowboy noticed a hungry young woman and decided to do something about it. And it was a lesson that echoed through the years, shaping not just a marriage but a family, a legacy, a way of loving that endured long after both James and Sarah had gone to their rest. Their love story became legend in the family, told and retold, a reminder that the greatest romances are not always the ones that burn brightest, but the ones that burn steadiest, through decades of days and nights and meals shared together. And in every telling, someone always mentioned the most important part, that he made sure her plate was full first, and he never stopped doing that, not for all the years of their lives together.